tattooed on you, and then you go, oh, the Church of Satan, that's so funny and edgy, and they're doing politics, and then like the hot girls are like, I'm gonna sign up, whatever, and then you do it too, and then you're like, oh, but what about the aesthetic of magic? Like, how crazy is magic? And now you're reading occult stuff. Oof. And now you're like, what if I tried it? You know, or like, what if we did it? Or what if I got like sigil tattoo? And then it like cascades down into the next thing you know, you're like, I wonder if this works. And now you're reading about it, and now you're interested in it.
Recently, Christian YouTuber Ruslan conducted an interview with a former Satanist. A very, very powerful, very interesting video. Make sure you check it out.
To aesthetic Satanists, full-on Satanists.
Wow. Are you going into it as a means to troll, or are you going into it as like, yeah, like I'm down with Satan, like that's the homie?
So I'm going into it like,
how long was this period, and did you experience anything beyond the natural realm?
Oh yeah, and I have this like horrific, overwhelming feeling that there's something on the other side of the door waiting for me to open it at night, and I'm like terrified that there's something outside the door.
You transition out of the military, and then at some point you got like a Satanist tattoo.
Yeah. I mean,
and at this point, are you believing in God, or are you not believing in anything?
No, I at this point, I'm like, I read like a Richard Dawkins book, and I was like, well, I know everything now, and I'm the smartest guy in the world, you know? And so it's so stupid. So I was like on my, like, this was, because remember, in these early 2000s, you and I, when we're adults, this is the like 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
You talk about the new atheists.
The new atheists, yeah, they're killing it right now.
Yeah, he's talking about Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens. He knows there's a God now, sadly. And I believe Daniel Dennett, I think that was his name. But there were 4 prominent atheists who came into more of the public sphere post 9/11. After 9/11, September 1st, they went around saying how religion poisons everything after the attacks on the World Trade Center towers, and they grew tremendously popular.
And then of course, like, I loved Hitchens, funny, charming, smart. Why wouldn't I trust this guy? And so I read Hitchens and stuff. So I was like a very like contrarian guy. Then I read a book called Dharma Punks and the Zen of punk rock or something. These 2 punk rock hardcore kid dudes that became Zen Buddhists. And one of them was much more interesting than the other. The other was doing like some weird stuff, but it doesn't matter. And so I got into that, and then I started to get into like learning about religion. And then I did the contrarian thing where I'm angry at religion as an institution of man and what they're up to and politics and whatever. And so then I got into Satanism, because that's like what girls are into.
Okay, hold on, back up.
You know, like goth girls.
So I had a Satanist acquaintance that I'll tell you about offline, because people are going to freak out. A handful of our core Patreons know who this acquaintance is, but I'm not going to say it publicly because it's a little sketch. When you say Satanism, are you talking about atheists trolling religion Satanism? Or are you talking about actual power in the satanic
they're the same
aspect?
Thing. They're the same.
They're the same thing.
They're no different. People. So the Satanism that's like registered with the government, the like quote unquote religion that uses its like its church, for lack of a better term, in order to affect politics, like trying to take the 10 commandments down, because they're like, well, if you get the 10 commandments, we get Baphomet type thing. Those,
it's weird. Just think about saying that you go around and you worship Satan. Like, just think about how weird that is. Now, I do know that there's some people who claim to be Satanists who embrace the ideas of Satan, meaning that he was rebellious against God, and they don't necessarily, or they don't claim to be believers in an actual being Satan, but they are more advocates of his worldview, his ideology, that rebellious, so-called free spirited type individual, and they hate all things religion for the most part. But it's just weird, just claiming that you embrace that ideology. But I guess if you just reject religion as being some fake people believing in myths, ancient myths, then I guess it's easy to make that leap.
People are trying to be secular, and it is like it's an aesthetic dressing in order to be political and troll, but also the types of people who come to them are interested in witchcraft and magic, are doing actual Satanism. And so it would be like if you started a fake Christian church and then people started showing up and they were like, well, it's Christian, let's do Christian stuff, even if it's aesthetic. And then before you know it, you're like, what would Christ want us to do on Monday? You know, and now you're actually doing it.
I guess what he's saying is that there's often a slippery slope. Before you know it, you're actually heading down some more occult-like practices or into some more occult-like practices. Really weird. Make sure you stay to the end. This conversation gets even crazier.
Thing where like me and my brother call each other bro exclusive. I don't say his name. It's very dorky. It's like we're in a Will Ferrell movie, and we did it as a joke. It started out, bro, what are you doing, bro? And then it becomes real. It catches on. And it catches on, and now that's how we actually talk. And I think that that's what's going on.
So when you got into it, you're saying that you're a 8 out of 10 atheist, influenced by the new atheists, and you're going into it initially your intent. Are you going into it as a means to troll?
Yeah.
Or are you going into it as like, yeah, like I'm down with Satan. Like that's the homie.
So I'm going into it like I'm down to troll.
Okay.
And also like I'm an alternative guy and my culture is heavy metal, right? And the metal aesthetic, which now we know is memento mori and it's actually a Christian aesthetic. But at the time you think like it's an evil aesthetic, Satan or whatever. And so it's like a meme to get like 666 or all these things.
For those of y'all who were around in my era, 70s, 80s, or who grew up in those times or that time, you knew that the whole, like he said, memento mori, that's news to me. I have no idea what he's talking about. I'm going to have to look into that. But much of 80s metal, I don't know if I would say much of, but there was a portion of 80s metal that really embraced the occult. Motley Crue, Judas Priest, if I'm not mistaken. I think AC/DC to some extent. But it seemed as if Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath, undoubtedly, without question. But I can't think of anyone else offhand, but I know that there was a definite segment of that genre that really took on the whole demonic aspects of it.
Things tattooed on you, and then you go, oh, the Church of Satan, that's so funny and edgy, and they're doing politics, and then like the hot girls are like, I'm gonna sign up, whatever, and then you do it too, and then you're like, oh, but what about the aesthetic of magic? Like, how crazy is magic? And now you're reading occult stuff. And now you're like, what if I tried it? You know, or like, what if we did it? Or what if I got like sigil tattoo? And then it like cascades down into the next thing you know, you're like, I wonder if this works. And now you're reading about it, and now you're interested in it. And then you're hearing like Satanist arguments or whatever. If God is so loving, why would he send his son to die instead of him? Which is obvious. They're the same guy. But like, you know, as a Satanist, Satanists are not.
Yeah, I know what he meant. That not exactly they're the same guy, but I know what he meant. That's kind of like a layman's understanding that Jesus is God. They share the same attributes.
Gnostics, you know, they're Gnostic heretics too. And so, which is a funny distinction. People don't think about that Satanists are Gnostic heretics. But yeah.
So how deep did you get into like the I don't know how else to say it, like the quote unquote real stuff?
Deep enough that like I had the sigil of Satan. I would argue against Christians that Satan is the better guy. You know, there are arguments people make for why, like, oh, but he's giving choice. You don't have free choice. You know, they have all their arguments that if you read anything about any religion, you can dismantle pretty easily. But I got into it, and then now I'm getting into magic and I'm getting into sigils and like all these other bad things. And
again, it points out the fact that when Romans 1 says that people suppress the truth of God in their unrighteousness, it's basically saying that although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. That we all know that God exists. Even the most ardent, adamant atheist, professing atheist, in his heart of hearts, deep within him, he understands that he is not a product of time and chance acting on matter, and that he can't help but live as if he's an image bearer of God. And you see here the slippery slope, the slow slide from I don't believe there's a God to, hey, maybe this stuff works. So they do believe in a supernatural. Again, it's the suppression of truth.
I'm, practicing. And then I have a woman in my life who was encouraging me to do these things. And so it was incredibly negative.
Wow. The ego, right? They follow the ego. That's the North Star of Satanism.
100%. And that's the whole thing where magic is perception equals reality, which means you're the center of your reality. And as you alter your perception, you are altering reality. But what you don't think about when you think about what magic is saying and what that's saying is that means my reality is the reality and everyone else's reality is less than. And how I perceive is real, but what I perceive isn't real. That's not what reality does not correspond to my perception. And so it's an incredibly selfish, egotistical, horrible way to live, but it's dressed up in the dressings of like, well, but you do come first. Take care of yourself. Self-care. No, you shouldn't have to suffer.
Man, that's so interesting when he talks about how it's so self-centered and reality is more than just simply how you feel or how you perceive things. Very similar to a lot of the political agenda today. People proclaiming that their gender is something that it isn't, simply because that's how they feel. And you see the clear tie with Satanism. Very scary, y'all. And it's part of the reason why I talk politics so much is because there is a clear link to a godless mindset, atheism, secularism, and here you see Satanism with the politics of the political left. Very scary.
You shouldn't have to pay. You should get yours. And it's like, at its heart, it's like wildly selfish and destructive, but
that's the spirit of the air though, right? That's literally what is being preached right now in the zeitgeist.
100%. When people are like, people say like X, Y, or Z is Satanist in like public life or media. And people are like, oh, we're doing the satanic panic again. And I agree the satanic panic was silly, but we're not panicking. We're making a literal observation about the value judgments you're making in media and stuff. Like they are Satanistic for sure. They are.
100.
And in your dabbling, how long was this period? And did you experience anything beyond the natural realm?
Oh yeah. So I dabbled for a couple years before I kind of just stepped back and then stepped into deism and sort of like, okay, well that's bad. But I did have strange experiences for sure. As a kid, I was a very scared kid. I thought I saw creatures and ghosts and like I would spend so much time being afraid. And I obviously got over that. Then I became like a pretty rough adult and I wasn't afraid of much. Once I started practicing and doing these negative things, like I would have so many moments where I'm bringing myself back to being a kid, where I wake up to go to the bathroom and I have this like horrific, overwhelming feeling that there's something on the other side of the door waiting for me to open it at night. And I would just sit in my bathroom as an adult man with my partner, wait in bed like at 1 a.m. And I'm like terrified that there's something outside the door. And those things continued until I stopped that practice. Yeah. And
wow. That's just wild. It's even though we are called to not have any fear, especially those of us who are in Christ, just the hearing that it's just really strange and it's not normal. It's not typical for us to see supernatural events. Hence the reason why they're called supernatural. They're outside of nature. They're beyond nature. But just hearing about that and knowing that there are people out there who are foolishly playing around with that, that's crazy.
And it didn't occur to me until much later how I was experiencing and feeling these things. You know? Yeah, it was crazy.
So you go from full-blown 8 out of 10 atheist.
Yeah.
To Satanist,
to aesthetic Satanist,
to aesthetic Satanist,
full-on Satanist.
Wow.
Yeah, and then back to aesthetic,
because you're like, okay, this stuff's real. I'm not playing with it anymore.
But I'm also like embarrassed, and I'm also like, oh, but I'm not a Christian. Everybody, I'm still like a cool metal dude, and like I'm a contrarian, and I have the sigil of Lucifer tattooed on my left hand, and like, and
then you go from that to deist.
Yeah, to where I'm sort of like, okay, that stuff sucks and is kind of embarrassing. I sort of like am growing up spiritually and being like, oh, it's kind of goofy to do that. Like, why do I even want to troll a Christian? Who cares? And I come into deism from the Big Bang.
Okay.
Father Lemaitre, I think that's his name. Shout out to him and Einstein for the Big Bang.
Yeah,
which
people don't know that the Big Bang was coined by a Catholic priest.
Yeah. And so as I began to learn about the Big Bang and the origins of the universe, because someone eventually will pose the question, something can't come from nothing.
That's right.
And then you go, well, where would it come from? Well, it can't come from inside space and time, so it exists outside of space and time.
Yep.
That's a simple argument, but it's very profound. I've used that in different conversations. At the very heart of this evolutionary Big Bang concept is life, matter, energy, space-time, all coming into existence out of nothing. Now, I know that now they try to argue or claim that there's a multiverse, but you still have to address the issue of, well, where did that come from? And it's a hard place for the evolutionists, the atheists, it's a hard thing for them to overcome. It can be a conversation stopper. And many of them will try to say, well, that's not, the evolution doesn't address that fact. It doesn't address where life came from. It more talks about how we evolved from lower level life forms. But at the same time, where they make that claim, nearly every book that talks about evolution addresses the issue of the beginning of life, the origins of life. Any documentary you basically watch will talk about where life started, how it started. And they'll all give some theory of a singularity or a meteor coming down and chemicals combining, resulting in the first life, even though there is such a thing as abiogenesis, life can't come from non-life. As much as the atheist wants to separate themselves from that problem, abiogenesis, I think it's a smart move to always point that out, because it just doesn't make any sense. Whereas the believer, the theist, and particularly the Christian, we say that God exists outside of space and time. He's a supernatural being, supernatural entity who lives in a spirit form. He's all powerful, all knowing. He's able to create physical matter out of nothing. And it makes far more sense, I think, to anybody who's willing to honestly address the issue that God created the universe, created all that we know, as opposed to it coming into existence out of nothing.
And it has to be intelligent. And if it's intelligent, that means it's all powerful. And if it's all powerful and we live in a world where there's good, then it must be all good. And you know, these logical things have, but I had that and I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm not Christian, but I literally can't think of another way this universe exists. So I'm going to push myself into deism because it's just logically makes sense.
And deism is the belief that there is a God who created all things, but he's not active in our everyday affairs. It's basically he spun the universe into existence and then kind of backed off.
Yeah, the evidence is there. There's more evidence for God than not.
Yes.
So
yes. And it's reasonable. It's reasonable and it's rational to think something caused this.
Yeah, it's incredibly reasonable, especially when you stop and you just think about creation in life from the perspective of just a logical, like, how and why, and not the, like, Christopher Hitchens, like, well, if God exists, then apparently your society is going to go to war with a different society. Like, they make these huge leaps that kind of make you think, well, religion's evil, so God must be evil. And, like, you know, then you become more open-minded, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, God is real. And, like, but who knows what he wants from us?
Yeah. The funny thing about that is the measure by which an atheist uses to judge God is still inherently a Christian measure. Like, you're trying to borrow from God to judge God, not understanding that God is outside of your own paradigm. And you're not only are you straw manning, but you're actually using Christian themed language to judge God, which is hilarious.
It is. The new atheists just get crushed in debate because they all have to defend moral relativism, which we all figured out recently is the argument to defeat them. Yeah. And so as soon as you bring up moral relativism and they're intellectually honest, it's pretty much over for them. Maybe not personally because they're okay with it, but any like random observer who's on the fence about God or not, and then they hear me go, the Holocaust was bad. And then they go, well, objectively, no. the rational person goes, I'm gonna go with the guy who said it was bad.
Yeah.
Right. That was just a little clip of this conversation. There's a longer one. I'll link the fuller video in the description below. Let me know if you appreciate this content, because I'll make more of it if I get a good enough response. And if you like videos like this, this kind of content, make sure you like and you give me a subscribe as well.